Welcome to Season 4 of the 12 Days of Celtic Mythology. Today is the fourth day of our season, and it's the 25th of December, which is a very important time for a lot of you. If you're with your family, I hope you'll be peaceful and appreciate having time with them. Not everybody is so lucky. So we're going to have a slightly shorter session today, I think. Your old storyteller needs a rest, so I can keep the good stories coming and the good questions. I know it all seems a bit random at the moment, the way the stories are being ordered, but I have a rough idea of where we're going, and I've been in these woods before. The comments section for day 3 seemed a little bit quiet. Hopefully by the time this appears, that will have changed. It might be partly my fault. I got it uploaded a bit late yesterday, so I hate to see lots of people dropping out so early. My suggestion is that if you do miss a day, go back and catch up if you want to, because you could still be in with a chance. Being late is going to put you in a better position than having a day missing. So today's story doesn't have any fish in it, but there will be more fish later. Today's story is from the Fenian cycle of Irish mythology, and it features the famous leader of the Fianna, Finn McCool. If that's unfamiliar territory for you, it shouldn't really matter. It's enough for you to know that Finn and his band of men are sworn to protect Ireland, but they spend their everyday lives mostly living in the woods, hunting and fishing. That's a huge oversimplification, but it's enough context for the story. If you'd like to delve a little deeper into the topics in my videos, you might enjoy taking one of my online classes. There's almost always something on offer. Some classes have tiered pay-what-you-can pricing, and there are usually a few scholarships available for the more expensive classes. To get notifications about classes and about scholarships when they're announced, you can go to my website and subscribe to my newsletter, or follow me on my Patreon page. Finn was out hunting one day with his men, accompanied by his 2 hounds who were called Bran and Skjolin. They wandered into a wooded glen that seemed unfamiliar, maybe a bit uncanny. It must have always been there. It was very beautiful and wild. Still, they had no luck at the hunting until suddenly a young doe started up from her resting place and bounded off. And she was surprisingly fast, and the hounds and the men were soon falling far behind Finn and his dogs. They were just about keeping up with her. They chased her for quite some time, and Finn marveled at her grace and her stamina. She never put a foot wrong, and she moved as lightly as if she might never get tired. Then she stopped. She didn't drop her head, gasping for air as a deer might when it's ready to give up, or when it's trying to catch its breath after a long run. No, her head was up. She just turned and gazed at him and at the dogs. And something passed between the 4 of them that Finn didn't understand. Some kind of recognition? She seemed to be looking for something in Finn's eyes. But what? And the dogs were behaving strangely. They wagged their tails like puppies, unsure of themselves. They bowed and they cocked their little heads, and the young doe looked at them as if she knew them. And then suddenly the dogs bounded up to her and began leaping and playing. And at first the doe recoiled, and Finn thought, oh, the chase will be back on again. But instead, the doe began to leap and play too. She touched noses with the dogs, and they reacted with glee. Oh, curious now, Finn stepped forward. The doe was alert, a little tense, and then she dropped her head and sniffed him, trembling a little. Finn still wasn't sure what this all meant, but his heart softened, and as his men caught up with him, he told them, hold the dogs off. The doe was tame, and it would be wrong to kill her. And when they made their way back to their camp, the doe followed them. When Finn awoke the next morning, a beautiful young woman, finely dressed, was standing beside him. She told him that she was called Sadhbh. She was a woman of the Tuatha Dé Danann, and she had been put into the shape of a deer by the druid called Fair Dorcha, the Dark Man. And this man loved her, but she had refused his love, and now Finn's kindness had released her. Finn looked into her eyes and felt that some flash of recognition passed between them again, as the same as the day before. He knew that they belonged together. He loved her, and she returned his love and lived with him as his wife after that. And Finn, he lost interest in a lot of things, in hunting, in fishing, or feats of combat, or even spending long evenings with his friends, singing and making poems. All this time, all his attention he gave to Sadhbh. They were deep, deep in an enchantment of love, until one day word came that Vikings were attacking Dublin, and Finn knew he had to gather his men and go and fight. He left some men behind to guard Sadhbh and servants to care for her, and told her that he'd return as soon as he could, and away he went. And every day Sadhbh would ask the servants whether today Finn might return. It really hadn't been that many days, but she missed him with an ache and a gnawing anxiety. She didn't feel safe without him. She didn't feel whole, and she knew that his son was growing inside her belly, and she wanted to give him the news. So every day she hoped to see him, and every day she was disappointed. She recognized Finn's fair hair, and there were his dogs, and Skjolin and Bran bounding around his legs. The dogs were glad to be home, and she ran to meet him. She went pelting down the hill at a headlong run into his arms, and then her heart skipped a beat. It was fair Dorcha. He had tricked her. He held her fast, but she had the strength of a deer, and she got loose and she started running back to the camp. But the dogs who were not Bran, not Skjolin, they grabbed her by the throat and dragged her back to their masters. The people of Finn's camp watched in horror. They gave chase, but they lost her in the forest without a trace. Finn returned a few weeks later, and they told him the tale. And the Fianna searched for months that stretched into a year, and they never found sign of her, not as a woman, not as a deer. And after that, when they hunted, Finn always took them in the direction of the glen where he'd found Sadhbh that day, although he could never find the exact spot again. For a long time this maddened him, and he would pace back toward camp and try to reduce the steps he'd taken that day. After a while, he stopped doing that. Maybe it was just habit now, which took him in the same direction, hoping to find Sadhbh, half afraid that if he did, the Fianna might kill her before they realized she wasn't an ordinary deer. They all knew what he was thinking. No one spoke about it. And one day, 7 years later, Finn and the Fianna were out hunting as usual, when they saw a boy, naked and filthy, lying under a bush. He seemed not to understand them when they spoke to him, but he was trusting. They took him home and cared for him. He learned speech quickly, and the more Finn looked at him, the more he thought that he had something of Sadhbh about him. His eyes were her eyes, his movements, her movements. And when it was possible to converse with the lad, who they called Oisin, Finn asked him what he could remember, and he said that he remembered a doe who watched over him, and he remembered a dark man who came often to where the doe was, and sometimes she spoke softly and kindly, but then the man would become angry, and he would shout, and the doe would tremble in fear, while he, the boy, lay hidden, watching. The man's anger grew greater with every visit, until one day he struck the doe with a hazel rod, and all the joy of life just seemed to go out of her. She dropped her head, she dropped her tail, and shuffled away after the dark man, and he never saw her again. And Finn knew that Oisin was his son. I'll just give you today's question before I forget. For the past few days, we've looked at slightly magical talking animals, but the story of Sadhbh is a bit of a departure. It's the first one we've looked at where someone has been turned into an animal. This is perhaps a little more common in folklore than in medieval texts, but it happens there too. So today's question is a bit of a research question again, since you seem to have liked the last one. Or it might be for some of you, I'm sure some of you will have ready answers. Can you name a story in which someone is turned into an animal by someone else? This might be done by a witch or a magician, for example. So let's be super clear. People who turn themselves into animals don't count here. Someone has to do it to them. So I need your answer to be clear enough that I'm able to know for sure which story you're talking about. If it's not a story I know, I might even come on the comments and ask you for a reference or something. That's not a problem. I don't mind asking. If you've got a good obscure story, I'd love to know about it. So I need you to tell me 4 things. The name of the person who got changed, what animal they got changed into, who changed them, and the name of the story, if you know it. So occasionally some characters in stories don't have a name, I know. So just explain who they are some other way, like the old man or the lady in the castle or whatever. Hopefully I'm covering all the bases for you, so you're not worried about doing this. And do make sure it's a story from Scotland or Wales or Ireland or some other Celtic region. No Grimm's fairy tales or world mythology, please. I promise you there are plenty of these. Try searching for people turned into animals in the Mabinogion or Scottish folklore, things like that, if you don't know of a story yourself. So the story of Sadhbh seems to be more a part of folklore, as a lot of the Fenian tales are. If it exists in a medieval manuscript, then I'm not aware of it. I've never been able to find one. The earliest written version I know about is in the works of Lady Gregory. So Lady Gregory is an interesting figure, much admired by some and much maligned by others. I think it's important to understand her as a person of her time, rather than to judge her by the preferences of our own era. She did a lot of good work in attempting to make translations of early Irish material, including medieval texts. The way she went about it was a bit odd, and sometimes maybe feels a bit patronizing, or at least it comes across that way to us now. She married into the Anglo-Irish aristocracy, but she often tried to write in the dialect local to where she grew up. Always a tricky line to walk. Yet she did so much to disseminate and popularize the myths at a time when a lot of Irish people didn't have them anymore. It's always important to remember that someone like Lady Gregory didn't choose to be born into her social position any more than some of us chose to be born poor. At least she tried to do good things. As for the quality of her translations, people often are discussing that. They're often not as bad as people think, as people make them out to be. If you compare them to other translators, you can often see that they're perfectly okay. Not always, though. So on the other hand, given a choice, if other translations exist, I would probably definitely use other translations. If you're not really familiar with Lady Gregory and want to know more, I'll put a link to a good short biography in the notes. Knowing who some of the great scholars and translators of Celtic material are is just another part of understanding the context of what you're reading, knowing more about the history of the text you're reading. And that kind of brings me to something I noticed about the comments in day 2 about the importance of knowing the history of a text. So most of you focused on the historical distant end of things in your answers on day 2. Who put the story in a manuscript in the first place? Is one manuscript different than another? Can we guess at what came before? All of that kind of thing. This was what I mostly saw. But it's worth looking at the reputation and quality of scholarship at the more recent end of things. What do other Celticists, Celtic studies scholars, think of this or that translator's work? You know, you can sometimes Google John Carey, academic reputation, or something like that to find out more. Or is the storyteller you're listening to at an informal gathering the type who adds a lot of things in just to suit themselves? What other work have they done? What topics do they specialize in? How deep does their knowledge go? It might take you a few years to feel any sense of comfort with things like that. But when it finally comes to you, it also adds some useful context to the study of Celtic mythology, which is still living and breathing, even in university departments or you might expect it to be dead as a dodo. So I'll leave you to your explorations of Lady Gregory and people getting turned into animals, and I'll see you tomorrow. Cheerio.